Asleep with Gina Marie. I bet you're here, not only for a classic short story, but because you want to finally find out what happened to Sally Carroll in that ice palace. Am I right? Well, good. I'm Gina. Marie says hi. And Bob, he sends his thanks to Evelyn and Simi and Teresa, Popcorn, and many others. He's very popular, you know. And I have to let Ross know something. Ross has requested something. Ross, I love Graham Greene so much too, but Our Man from Havana is as good as it is. It's just too long for our format. It's a novel. So for Fast Asleep, yeah, we need short stories. I'll try to make it up to you, though, with more amazing Graham Greene short stories, and I bet you have a particular one that we haven't done yet that you'd like us to do, so let me know. And if you all didn't know before this, we love taking your requests for classic short stories. We also love any time you comment, like, review, and subscribe. So now, about that Ice Palace thing. F. Scott Fitzgerald was a legendary author, as we learned last week, as if you didn't already know. He was legendary for his talent, certainly, and his ability to live life to its fullest. He and wife Zelda, they had no trouble enjoying all that wealth and fame. What we didn't cover last week was something interesting about his time during the Army. F. Scott Fitzgerald trained under future President Dwight Eisenhower. And guess what? He did not like Eisenhower one little bit. He even had the guts to sleep during his lectures. Oof. And also, did you know that Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway were very close friends? At one time, they both lived in Paris, and they shared their first drafts of works with one another. Hemingway asked Fitzgerald to review A Farewell to Arms. Oh, he did. Fitzgerald gave him 10 pages of edits and comments, and he ended with, quote, "A beautiful book it is," unquote. Hemingway had a response. Are you ready? Here's the quote. "Kiss my ass," signed E.H., unquote. Okay, let's get to the conclusion of The Ice Palace. You know, as beautifully written as the first half of this story is, it is really today's conclusion that I've been waiting for. It really delivers. So last week, we know, Southern belle Sally Carroll and Northerner Harry Bellamy become engaged. Sally Carroll travels to his home state of Minnesota, a little different from southernmost Georgia, and she begins the ordeal of becoming accustomed to Harry's friends and family and Minnesota's icy winters. Harry is anxiously awaiting the upcoming winter carnival and a chance to take Sally Carroll to the most astonishing ice palace. It was a real place, and it really, truly was astonishing. All right, everybody. If you have not done this already, please listen to last week's episode first. Last week, we did the first half of today's story. And now for the rest of us. Here we go. Published in 1920. Tuck in, everybody. Well, because it's cold where we're headed. For the conclusion of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Ice Palace. That night, amid the gleaming candles of a dinner party, where the men seemed to do most of the talking, while the girls sat in a haughty and expensive aloofness. Even Harry's presence on her left failed to make her feel at home. "Oh, they're a good-looking crowd, don't you think?" he demanded. "I mean, just look round. There's Spud Hubbard, tackle at Princeton last year. And Junie Morton, he and the red-haired fellow next to him were both Yale hockey captains. Junie was in my class. Why, the best athletes in the world come from these states round here. This is a man's country, I tell you. Look at John J. Fishburne."
"Who's he?" asked Sally Carrol innocently.
"Don't you know?"
"I've heard the name."
Greatest wheat man in the Northwest and one of the greatest financiers in the country."
Sally turned suddenly to a voice on her right.
"I guess they forgot to introduce us. My name's Roger Patton."
"My name is Sally Carrol Happer," she said graciously.
"Oh, yes, I know. Harry told me you were coming."
"Are you a relative?"
"No, I'm a professor."
"Oh,"
she laughed. "At the university. Now, you're from the South, aren't you?"
"Yes, Tarleton, Georgia." She liked him immediately. A reddish-brown mustache under watery blue eyes that had something in them that these other eyes lacked, some quality of appreciation. They exchanged stray sentences through dinner, and she made up her mind to see him again. After coffee, she was introduced to numerous good-looking young men who danced with conscious precision and seemed to take it for granted she wanted to talk about nothing except Harry. Heavens, she thought. They talk as if my being engaged made me older than they are, as if I'd tell their mothers on them. In the South, an engaged girl, why, even a young married woman, expected the same amount of half-affectionate badinage and flattery that would be accorded to a debutante. Oh, but here, all that seemed banned. One young man, after getting well started on the subject of Sally Carrol's eyes and how they had allured him ever since she entered the room, went into a violent confusion when he found she was visiting the Bellamys, was Harry's fiancée. He seemed to feel as though he had made some risque and inexcusable blunder, became immediately formal, and left her at the first opportunity. She was rather glad when Roger Patton cut in on her and suggested that they sit out a while. "Well," he inquired, blinking cheerily, "how's Carmen from the South?" Referring to Carmen Miranda from South America. "Mighty fine. How's Dangerous Dan McGrew?" "Sorry, he's the only Northerner I know much about." A notorious outlaw from the Yukon. And he seemed to enjoy that. "Of course," he confessed, "as a professor of literature, I'm not supposed to have read Dangerous Dan McGrew." "Are you a native?" "No, I'm a Philadelphian, imported from Harvard to teach French. But I've been here 10 years. 9 years, 364 days longer than me." "Well, do you like it here?" "Uh-huh, sure do." "Really?" "Well, why not? Don't I look as if I were having a good time?" "I saw you look out the window a minute ago and shiver." "Oh, just my imagination," laughed Sally Carrol. "I'm used to having everything quiet outside, and sometimes I look out and I see a flurry of snow, and it's just as if something dead was moving." He nodded appreciatively. "Ever been north before?" Spent 2 Julys in Asheville,"
North Carolina.
Nice-looking crowd, aren't they? Suggested Patton, indicating the swirling floor.
Sally Carrol started. Well, this had been Harry's remark. Well, sure are. They're canine.
What?
She flushed. Oh, I'm sorry. That sounded worse than I meant it. You see, I always think of people as feline or canine, irrespective of sex.
Which are you?
Oh, I'm feline. So are you. So are most Southern men. And most of the girls here.
What's Harry?
Harry's canine, distinctly. All the men I've met tonight seem to be canine.
What does canine imply? A certain conscious masculinity as opposed to subtlety?
I reckon so. I never analyzed it, only I just look at people and say canine or feline, right off. It's right absurd, I guess.
Not at all. I'm interested. I used to have a theory about these people. You know, I think they're freezing up.
What?
I think they're growing like Swedes. Ibbenesque, you know? Very gradually getting gloomy and melancholy. It's these long winters. You ever read any Ibsen? She shook her head. Well, you find in his characters a certain brooding rigidity. Oh, they're righteous, narrow, and cheerless, without infinite possibilities for great sorrow or joy.
Without smiles or tears?
Exactly. That's my theory. You see, there are thousands of Swedes up here. They come, I imagine, because the climate is very much like their own, and there's been a gradual mingling. Now, there's probably not half a dozen here tonight, but we've had 4 Swedish governors. Oh, am I boring you?
Oh, I'm mighty interested.
Well, your future sister-in-law is half Swedish. Personally, I like her, but my theory is that Swedes react rather badly on us as a whole. Scandinavians, you know, they have the largest suicide rate in the world.
Well, why do you live here if it's so depressing?
Oh, well, it doesn't get me. I'm pretty well cloistered, and I suppose books mean more than people to me anyway.
Oh, but writers, they all speak about the South being tragic. You know, Spanish senoritas, black hair and daggers and haunting music.
He shook his head. No, the northern races are the tragic races. They don't indulge in the cheering luxury of tears.
Sally Carrol thought of her graveyard. She supposed that was vaguely what she had meant when she said it didn't depress her.
Now, the Italians, they are the gayest people in the world, but, it's a dull subject. He broke off. Anyway, I want to tell you, you're marrying a pretty fine man.
Sally Carrol was moved by an impulse of confidence. I know. Now, I'm the sort of person who wants to be taken care of after a certain point, and I feel sure I will be.
Shall we dance? You know,
he continued as they rose,
it's encouraging to find a girl who knows what she's marrying for. 9/10 of them think of it as a sort of walking into a moving picture sunset.
She laughed and liked him immensely. 2 hours later, on the way home, she nestled near Harry in the back seat. "Oh, Harry," she whispered, "it's so cold."
"But it's warm in here, darling girl."
"Oh, but outside it's cold, and that howling wind." She buried her face deep in his fur coat and trembled involuntarily as his cold lips kissed the tip of her ear.
Part 4. The first week of her visit passed in a whirl. She had her promised toboggan ride at the back of an automobile through a chill January twilight. Swathed in furs, she put in a morning tobogganing on the country club hill. Even tried skiing to sail through the air for a glorious moment, and then land in a tangled, laughing bundle on a soft snowdrift. She liked all the winter sports, except an afternoon spent snowshoeing over a glaring plain under pale yellow sunshine. But she soon realized that these things were for children, that she was being humored, and that the enjoyment round her was only a reflection of her own. At first, the Bellamy family puzzled her. The men were reliable, and she liked them. To Mr. Bellamy especially, with his iron-gray hair and energetic dignity, she took an immediate fancy. Once she found that he was born in Kentucky, this made of him a link between the old life and the new. But toward the women, she felt a definite hostility. Myra, her future sister-in-law, seemed the essence of spiritless conventionality. Oh, her conversation was so utterly devoid of personality that Sally Carrol, who came from a country where a certain amount of charm and assurance could be taken for granted in the women, was inclined to despise her. If those women aren't beautiful, she thought, they're nothing. They just fade out when you look at them. They're glorified domestics. Men are the center of every mixed group. And lastly, there was Mrs. Bellamy, whom Sally Carrol detested. The first day's impression of an egg had been confirmed. An egg with a cracked, veiny voice and such an ungracious dumpiness of carriage that Sally Carrol felt that if she once fell, she would surely scramble. In addition, Mrs. Bellamy seemed to typify the town in being innately hostile to strangers. She called Sally Carrol Sally, and could not be persuaded that the double name was anything more than a tedious, ridiculous nickname. To Sally Carrol, this shortening of her name was like presenting her to the public half-clothed. She loved Sally Carrol. She loathed Sally. She knew also that Harry's mother disapproved of her bobbed hair, and she had never dared smoke downstairs after that first day when Mrs. Bellamy had come into the library sniffing violently. Of all the men she met, she preferred Roger Patton, who was a frequent visitor at the house. He never again alluded to the Ibbenesque tendency of the populace, but when he came in one day and found her curled upon the sofa, bent over Peer Gynt, he laughed and told her to forget what he'd said, that it was all rot. And then, one afternoon in her second week, she and Harry hovered on the edge of a dangerously steep quarrel. She considered that he precipitated it entirely, though the Serbia in the case was an unknown man who had not had his trousers pressed. They'd been walking homeward between mounds of high-piled snow, and under a sun which Sally Carrol scarcely recognized,
They passed this little girl, done up in gray wool until she resembled a small teddy bear, and Sally Carrol could not resist a gasp of maternal appreciation. "Oh, look, Harry." "What?" "That little girl, did you see her face?" "Yes, why?" "Well, it was red as a little strawberry. Oh, she was cute." "Well, your own face is almost as red as that already." "Everybody's healthy here. We're out in the cold as soon as we're old enough to walk. It's a wonderful climate." She looked at him and had to agree. He was mighty healthy looking. So was his brother. And she had noticed the new red in her own cheeks that very morning. Suddenly, their glances were caught and held, and they stared for a moment at the street corner ahead of them. A man was standing there, his knees bent, his eyes gazing upward with a tense expression as though he were about to make a leap toward the chilly sky. And then they both exploded into a shout of laughter, for coming closer, they discovered it had been a ludicrous momentary illusion produced by the extreme bagginess of the man's trousers. "I reckon that's one on us," she laughed. "Oh, he must be a Southerner, judging by those trousers," suggested Harry mischievously. "Why, Harry!" Her surprised look must have irritated him. "Those damn Southerners!" Sally Carrol's eyes flashed. "Don't call 'em that!" "Well, I'm sorry, dear," said Harry, malignantly apologetic. "But you know what I think of them. They're sort of degenerates. Not at all like the old Southerners. Oh, they've lived so long down there with all the other people that they've gotten lazy and shiftless." "Hush your mouth, Harry," she cried angrily. "They are not. Well, they may be lazy. Anybody would be in that climate, but they're my best friends, and I don't want to hear 'em criticized in any such sweeping way. Some of 'em are the finest men in the world." "Oh, I know. They're all right when they come north to college, but of all the hang-dog, ill-dressed, slovenly lot I ever saw, a bunch of small-town Southerners, oh, they're the worst." Sally Carrol was clenching her gloved hands and biting her lip furiously. "Why," continued Harry, "there was one in my class at New Haven, and we all thought that at last we'd found the true type of Southern aristocrat. Oh, but it turned out that he wasn't an aristocrat at all, just the son of a northern carpetbagger who owned about all the cotton round Mobile." "A Southerner wouldn't talk the way you're talking now," she said evenly. They haven't the energy." "Or something else." Well, now, I'm sorry, Sally Carrol, but I've heard you say yourself that you'd never marry. That's quite different. I told you I wouldn't tie my life to any of the boys that are around Tarleton now, but I never made any sweeping generalities." They walked along in silence. "I probably spread it on a bit thick, Sally Carrol. I'm sorry." She nodded, but made no answer. 5 minutes later, as they stood in the hallway, she suddenly threw her arms around him. "Oh, Harry," she cried, her eyes brimming with tears. Let's get married next week. I'm afraid of having fusses like that. I'm afraid, Harry. And it wouldn't be that way if we were married." But Harry, being in the wrong, was still irritated. "Oh, that'd be idiotic. We decided on March." The
The tears in Sally Carrol's eyes faded. Her expression hardened slightly.
Very well. I suppose I shouldn't have said that.
Harry melted. "Oh, you dear little nut," he cried. "Come and kiss me, and let's forget." That very night, at the end of a vaudeville performance, the orchestra played Dixie, and Sally Carrol felt something stronger and more enduring than her tears and smiles of the day brim up inside her. She leaned forward, gripping the arms of her chair until her face grew crimson. "Sort of get you, dear," whispered Harry. But she did not hear him. To the spirited throb of the violins and the inspiring beat of the kettle drums, her own old ghosts were marching by and on into the darkness. And as fifes whistled and sighed in the low encore, they seemed so nearly out of sight that she could have waved goodbye.
Away, away, away down south in Dixie.
Stay with me. I'll be right back. Part 5. It was a particularly cold night. A sudden thaw had nearly cleared the streets the day before, but now they were traversed again with a powdery wraith of loose snow that traveled in wavy lines before the feet of the wind and filled the lower air with a fine particled mist. There was no sky, only a dark, ominous tent that draped in the tops of the streets and was in reality a vast approaching army of snowflakes. While over it all, chilling away the comfort from the brown and green glow of lighted windows and muffling the steady trot of the horse pulling their sleigh, interminably washed the north wind. It was a dismal town after all, she thought. Dismal. Sometimes at night, it had seemed to her as though no one lived here. They had all gone long ago, leaving lighted houses to be covered in time by tombing heaps of sleet. Oh, if there should be snow on her grave, to be beneath the great piles of it all winter long, where even her headstone would be a light shadow against light shadows. Her grave, a grave that should be flower-strewn and washed with sun and rain. She thought again of those isolated country houses that her train had passed, and of the life there the long winter through, the ceaseless glare through the windows, the crust forming on the soft drifts of snow. Finally, the slow, cheerless melting, and the harsh spring of which Roger Patton had told her. Her spring, to lose it forever, with its lilacs and the lazy sweetness it stirred in her heart. She was laying away that spring. Afterward, she would lay away that sweetness. With a gradual insistence, the storm broke. Sally Carrol felt a film of flakes melt quickly on her eyelashes, and Harry reached over a furry arm and drew down her complicated flannel cap. Then the small flakes came in skirmish line, and the horse bent his neck patiently as a transparency of white appeared momentarily on his coat. "Oh, Harry, he's cold," she said quickly.
Who? The horse? Oh, no, he isn't. He likes it.
After another 10 minutes, they turned a corner and came in sight of their destination. On a tall hill, outlined in vivid, glaring green against the wintry sky, stood the Ice Palace. It was 3 stories in the air, with battlements and embrasures and narrow icicled windows, and the innumerable electric lights inside made a gorgeous transparency of the great central hall. Sally Carrol clutched Harry's hand under the fur robe. "Oh, it's beautiful," he cried excitedly. "My golly, it's beautiful, isn't it? They haven't had one here since '85. Somehow the notion of there not having been one since '85 oppressed her. Ice was a ghost, and this mansion of it was surely peopled by those shades of the '80s, with pale faces and blurred, snow-filled hair. "Come on, dear," said Harry. She followed him out of the sleigh and waited while he hitched the horse. A party of 4, Gordon, Myra, Roger Patton, and another girl, drew up beside them with a mighty jingle of bells. Oh, there were quite a crowd already, bundled in fur or sheepskin, shouting and calling to each other as they moved through the snow, which was now so thick that people could scarcely be distinguished a few yards away. "It's 170 feet tall," Harry was saying to a muffled figure beside him as they trudged toward the entrance. "Covers 6,000 square yards." She caught snatches of conversation. "One main hall. Walls 20 to 40 inches thick. And the ice cave has almost a mile of this Canuck who built it." They found their way inside, and dazed by the magic of the great crystal walls, Sally Carrol found herself repeating over and over 2 lines from Kubla Khan. It was a miracle of rare device, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. In the great glittering cavern, with the dark shut out, she took a seat on a wooden bench, and the evening's oppression lifted. Harry was right. It was beautiful, and her gaze traveled the smooth surface of the walls, the blocks for which had been selected for their purity and clearness to obtain this opalescent, translucent effect.
Oh, look, here we go. Oh, boy,
cried Harry. A band in a far corner struck up "Hail, Hail, the Gang's All Here," which echoed over to them in wild, muddled acoustics, and then the lights suddenly went out. Silence seemed to flow down the icy sides and sweep over them. Sally Carrol could still see white breath in the darkness and a dim row of pale faces over on the other side. The music eased to a sighing complaint, and from outside drifted in the full-throated, resonant chant of the marching clubs. It grew louder, like some paean of a Viking tribe traversing an ancient wild. It swelled. They were coming nearer. And then a row of torches appeared, and another, and keeping time with their moccasined feet, a long column of gray mackinawed figures swept in, snowshoes slung at their shoulders, torches soaring and flickering as their voices rose along the great walls. The gray column ended, and another followed, the light streaming luridly this time over red toboggan caps and flaming crimson mackinaws. And as they entered, they took up the refrain. Then came a long platoon of blue and white, of green, of white, of brown and yellow. "Those white ones are the Wakuta Club," whispered Harry eagerly. "Those are the men you've met round at dances." The volume of the voices grew. The great cavern was a phantasmagoria of torches waving in great banks of fire, of colors, and the rhythm of soft leather steps. The leading column turned and halted. Platoon deployed in front of platoon until the whole procession made a solid flag of flame. And then, from thousands of voices, burst a mighty shout that filled the air like a crash of thunder and sent the torches wavering. It was magnificent. It was tremendous. To Sally Carrol, it was the North offering sacrifice on some mighty altar to the gray pagan god of snow. As the shout died, the band struck up again, and there came more singing, and then long reverberating cheers by each club. She sat very quiet, listening, while the staccato cries rent the stillness. And then she started, for there was a volley of explosion, and great clouds of smoke went up, here and there, through the cavern. The flash, the light, photographers at work. And the council was over. With the band at their head, the clubs formed in column once more, took up their chant, and began to march out. "Come on!" shouted Harry. "We want to see the labyrinths downstairs before they turn the lights off." They all rose and started toward the chute. Harry and Sally Carrol in the lead, her little mitten buried in his big fur gauntlet. At the bottom of the chute was a long, empty room of ice, with a ceiling so low that they had to stoop, and their hands were parted. Before she realized what he intended, Harry had darted down one of the half-dozen glittering passages that opened into the room, and was only a vague receding blot against the green shimmer. "Harry?" she called. "Come on!" he cried back. She looked around the empty chamber. Well, the rest of the party had evidently decided to go home and were already outside somewhere in the blundering snow. She hesitated and then darted in after Harry. "Harry!" she shouted. She had reached a turning point 30 feet down. She heard a faint muffled answer far to the left, and with a touch of panic, fled toward it. She passed another turning, 2 more yawning alleys. "Harry!" No answer. She started to run straight forward, and then turned like lightning and sped back the way she had come, enveloped in a sudden, icy terror. She reached a turn. Was it here? Took the left and came to what should have been the outlet into the long, low room, but it was only another glittering passage with darkness at the end. She called again, but the walls gave back a flat, lifeless echo with no reverberations. Retracing her steps, she turned another corner, and this time following a wide passage. It was like the green lane between the parted waters of the Red Sea, like a damp vault connecting empty tombs. She slipped a little now as she walked, for ice had formed on the bottom of her overshoes. She had to run her gloves along the half-slippery, half-sticky walls to keep her balance. "Harry!" Still no answer. The sound she made bounced mockingly down to the end of the passage. Then, on an instant, the lights went out, and she was in complete darkness. She gave a small frightened cry and sank down into a cold little heap on the ice. She felt her left knee do something as she fell, but she scarcely noticed it, as some deep terror, far greater than any fear of being lost, settled upon her. She was alone with this presence that came out of the north, the dreary loneliness that rose from ice-bound whalers in the Arctic seas, from smokeless, trackless wastes where were strewn the whitened bones of adventure. It was an icy breath of death. It was rolling down low across the land to clutch at her. With a furious, despairing energy, she rose again and started blindly down the darkness. She must get out. She might be lost in here for days, freeze to death, and lie embedded in the ice like corpses she had read of, kept perfectly preserved until the melting of a glacier. Harry probably thought she had left with the others. He had gone by now. No one would know until late next day. She reached pitifully for the wall. 40 inches thick, they had said. 40 inches thick. Oh, On both sides of her, along the walls, she felt things creeping, damp souls that haunted this palace, this town, this north. Oh, send somebody, she cried aloud. Clark Darrow. He would understand. Or Joe Ewing. She couldn't be left here to wander forever, to be frozen, heart, body, and soul. This Sally Carrol. Why, she was a happy thing. She was a happy little girl. She liked warmth and summer and Dixie. These things were foreign. Foreign. You're not crying, something said aloud. You'll never cry anymore. Your tears would just freeze. All tears freeze up here. She sprawled full length on the ice. Oh, God, she faltered. A long single file of minutes went by, and with a great weariness, she felt her eyes closing. Then someone seemed to sit down near her and take her face in warm, soft hands. Oh, she looked up gratefully. Why, it's Marjorie Lee, she crooned softly to herself. I knew you'd come. It really was Marjorie Lee, and she was just as Sally Carrol had known she would be, with a young white brow and wide, welcoming eyes, and a hoop skirt of some soft material that was quite comforting to rest on. Marjorie Lee. It was getting darker now, and darker. All those tombstones ought to be repainted, sure enough, only that would spoil them, of course. Still, you ought to be able to see them. Then, after a succession of moments that went fast and then slow, but seemed to be ultimately resolving themselves into a multitude of blurred rays converging toward a pale yellow sun, she heard a great cracking noise break her newfound stillness. It was the sun. It was a light, a torch, and a torch beyond that, and another one, and voices. A face took flesh below the torch. Heavy arms raised her, and she felt something on her cheek. It felt wet. Someone had seized her and was rubbing her face with snow. Oh, how ridiculous. With snow. Sally Carrol. Sally Carrol. Oh, he was Dangerous Dan McGrew and two other faces she didn't know.
child, we've been looking for you 2 hours. Oh, Harry's half crazy.
Things came rushing back into place. The singing, the torches, the great shout of the marching clubs. Oh, she squirmed in Patton's arms and gave a long, low cry. Oh, I want to get out of here. I'm going back home. You take me home. Her voice rose to a scream that sent a chill to Harry's heart as he came racing down the next passage. Tomorrow, she cried with delirious, unrestrained passion. Tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow. Part 6. The wealth of golden sunlight poured, a quite enervating yet oddly comforting heat over the house, where day long it faced the dusty stretch of road. 2 birds were making a great to-do in a cool spot found among the branches of a tree next door. And down the street, a woman was announcing herself melodiously as a purveyor of strawberries. It was April afternoon. Sally Carol Happer, resting her chin on her arm and her arm on an old window seat, gazed sleepily down over the spangled dust whence the heat waves were rising for the first time this spring. She was watching a very ancient Ford turn a perilous corner and rattle and groan to a jolting stop at the end of the walk. She made no sound, and in a minute a strident, familiar whistle rent the air. Sally Carol smiled and blinked. Good morning. A head appeared tortuously from under the car top below. "'Tain't mornin', Sally Carol." "Sure enough?" she said in affected surprise. "Oh, I guess maybe not." "What you doin'?" "Eatin' green peach. 'Spect to die any minute." Clark twisted himself a last impossible notch to get a view of her face. "Water's warm as a kettle of steam, Sally Carol. You want to go swimming?" "Oh, I hate to move," sighed Sally Carol lazily. "But I reckon so." Introduction information for this episode is from PBS American Masters and an article entitled 10 Surprising Facts About F. Scott Fitzgerald, and other sources in our show notes. Music for this episode is Suspicion from Sherwood Roberts, Dixie from Karen Elson and the Secret Sisters, Saudade from Sangre de Muertago, Hail, Hail, the Gang's All Here from Pro Sound Karaoke Band, Run from Ludovico Einaudi, Shelter from Andrew Gialinella, and Midnight on the Water from John Reichman, Scott Nygaard, and Sharon Gilchrist. Talk to us, won't you? Right here in comments. Or you can email us at fastasleep with GinaMarie44@gmail.com. Or why not reach us on Instagram, Facebook, and once in a while, TikTok. Your reviews, likes, comments, and subscriptions keep us here for you. Thank you for those. And thank you for your listening. Keyword, can't help it. It has to be just like last week. Home. And next week, Agatha Christie. Good night.